I will talk mostly about maybe my perspective of research, and I've been in Montreal for the last 2 years now at Concordia University as principal of a school called the School of Community and Public Affairs, which is a very interesting little space at Concordia University. But before that, I was at l'Université de Moncton au Nouveau-Brunswick, donc dans un environnement très différent, unilingue francophone, a small university. But my experience with immigration and doing research on immigration started really from that perspective. Small, outside large metropolis, looking at places where there were, non-existent collaboration between different stakeholders on immigration. It was new. Mostly when we think of Francophone immigration, everything was to be built, and that really is also different. So I will speak maybe from that perspective. Margie this morning said, what did she say? It was fun. Multi stakeholders partnerships are fun. I think research is also very fun. I was in Rimouski last week doing field work as a researcher. That's where I want to be, talking to people on the ground. I was doing research on integration of international students in a small 50,000 remote city, 6 hours from Montreal. But talking to young students, 18, 19-year-old students from Togo, l'Île Maurice, that was really what when I say the love of research is, it's important to keep this as a goal. So when we consider research in the last, I thought, 50 years in Canada, we know that there's been major transformation in the way we do research. There's new objects of research, for example, categories of immigrants, destination of immigrants in Canada, changing policies, practices, the role of communities, new stakeholders. That's a reality. There's also these new models in the way we're doing research. So we mentioned P2P, but before that maybe the Metropolis project. That came, that's been driving forces to change maybe the way we see research. I think as a researcher, I take a lot of, I like to know what was there before. So I think you need also a background, a historical background. So I was thinking, when we think settlement 50 years ago, it's a complete different picture, and we had classic work from researchers looking at settlement in the 1960s and the 1970s, and we need also to understand this. But the immigration environment has evolved to a more complex set of relation, and it's the relation between research and policy making that has really changed, I think. So we need to think of this in a way that maybe we can ask this question of who provides the research and who consumes the research. And I think on that sort of analysis, we can see that there's been a lot of changes. So the role of the researcher is to provide knowledge. It's pretty obvious. We all agree on this. We agree that we need sound research. I think we need, and that was discussed a bit, we need some mainstream research. I could call it mainstream, but we can also think of an alternative way of doing research, so we need to be open to this. It's true that today we package research in various formats, and that's something that has been discussed also. We also know that some researchers are keen in doing this, others maybe are not interested by playing this game, and I think we see also that researchers can be active in shaping a research that will be interested in policy formulation, but there's also researchers that will be quite distant from this and prefer to stay in their own environment. And in my experience, I would say that it's been sometimes very difficult to break from certain habits. So, as a researcher, I'm in an environment, my university culture, my disciplinary silo, which is also something quite interesting. Interdisciplinary work is something that in the university world we talk a lot about interdisciplinary, but in reality, it's sometimes you see people. It's a challenge to practice interdisciplinary work for numerous reasons. But personally, I had the opportunity to engage in different research projects closer to community needs. I was open also to use different tools as a researcher, video, multimedia, and I think in that perspective, research can bring a lot to different communities. Like I said, at the School of Community and Public Affairs, we're practicing this model of collaborative work with community actors in Montreal. We have students doing internships in immigration settlement agencies, and that's a very interesting experience for them. It's a learning experience, so we engage students to be on the field working with community actors. I could give you more example, but I'll move, because I don't see how many minutes I have left. But I'll move to maybe some challenges. Briefly, building research capacity. It's a challenge. I mean, in my experience in the Atlantic region with the Atlantic Metropolis Center, we had to build this research capacity from a point where people were thinking that why would you do research on immigration in Atlantic Canada? You don't have any immigrants, but we still have immigrants. My experience with the Francophone file also, we were a bit like the new kids on the block, I was thinking, where we had to tell different groups, different stakeholders who were holding strong on their ground. We had to tell them that there is a need, for example, if research is telling you that there is a need for services to different immigrants, different categories of immigrants. So there was it was a very interesting time in changing maybe the way that people were used to work with immigrants coming in the region. Immigrants were not only refugees, there were new categories of migrants moving, mobility of immigration. So the region was changing, and I think researchers in that region were very, in working with other actors, it was very an interesting time. Maybe another challenge would be, and you mentioned this also, breaking the expert syndrome, I called it. Research is not only the expert from the top saying to the people who are listening, this is the result and you should follow what I'm saying. I think it's not one direction, it should be dialogue. And I would give you one example. I think it was a meeting at the Atlantic Metropolis Conference. It was our last meeting, but I remember this researcher presenting his results, and someone from the audience asked a question, and he gave an answer, and the person said, "I'm not satisfied with your answer," so she asked another question, and I felt the researcher, the expert, felt that, I know what I'm saying, but the member it was an NGO member asking a question, and I think it was very illustrative of what we were trying to do with the experience of collaborative research. 2 minutes. Okay, building confidence between different stakeholders, keeping it, that's a challenge. We can build it, but we need to keep it, and in recent years I think that has been probably the biggest challenge. We mentioned this morning. There's the complexity of the file, the relation between stakeholders. It's quite challenging with the culture we had with different level of governments, understanding the role of each in the process. But the other challenge also, and I will end maybe on this, is the growing politicization of the migration issue. That has been also a challenge. When we think of temporary foreign workers, refugee, that has created also an environment that has been a bit tense for the relation between researchers and I would call it the political process. But there has been a lot of debate on certain issues, and I think that's something that we saw with the refugee, like I said. Maybe in Europe it's even a bigger issue, but in Canada in recent years I think that has created some rigidity in research policy dialogue. So I will maybe end on this. Merci.